deep over time. So I think that's a challenge. So one of the things that I did, if you scroll down in that Google Doc, is you see that little diagram with the car, right? And this is sort of, I used this in a workshop here with the school administrators of Iowa a couple months ago, and if you sort of view your school district as this, here you are in your car and you're in your current state and you're trying to get to some ideal destination, right? Rainbows and unicorns and sunshine and the whole bit, right? But there's going to be bumps along the way as an organization. There's going to be roadblocks and traps and slippery areas and whatever, and it's sort of our job as the leader to sort of blow that stuff up that gets in the way between us and the rainbows and the unicorns and the sunshine, right? So one of the questions is, when you think about professional learning and that very precious time that you have for PD as a vehicle to get from current state to ideal state, is how do you set up your PD in such a way so it's not single event driven, but it's really a systemic plan, right? And I think in order to do that, you have to be purposeful, you have to be intentional, you have to be pretty thoughtful about what does a long-term layout look like. I think the other sort of truism that we all know but we violate repeatedly is this notion that less is more, and that we do the work that we learn the work by doing the work. In other words, you don't learn anything by somebody talking to you about it. You learn it by actually doing it, and then talking about it, right, and making sense of it afterwards, as opposed to just hearing about it but never getting a chance to do it. And we violate that all the time in our PD work, because somebody stands up front in review like I'm doing right now and blabs at you for a while, and you're like, okay, now I'm supposed to get it, but you had never had any chance to immerse yourselves and do it and actually get hands-on and get dirty. So let me show you one way that we're sort of trying to attack that, and I will, one of you asked questions about assessing tech integration into the curriculum, and I'll show how we sort of combine those ideas together. So I'm going to paste another link here into our Hangout. So to a thing we're working on called the Trudicot. Okay, so there it is. And if you guys go there, what you will see is that we have been trying to come up with some very concrete protocols and questions that teachers and administrators can ask about lessons and units that will allow them to think critically about tech integration in the classroom. What happens right now is that most administrators are just so delighted to see tech being used in the classroom at all by kids and teachers that they give it a big check mark, right? They're all excited that there's actually just anything in there at all, and there's no critical thinking about what's happening. So we've been trying to come up with a set of very concrete look-fors and sort of a question protocol that you could use, that you could then look at a lesson or look at a unit either beforehand on the design phase or afterwards, say in an observation model, and say, what are you trying to achieve, right? Tech for the purpose of what, and that's always key. And then if this is one of the things you're trying to achieve with your tech use, here's some questions you could ask, right? So if you kind of scroll through the Trudicot, you look at sections A and B. Sections A and B are really about personalization and individualization and student agency and control and ownership over the learning process. And it's really trying to get at who gets to decide, who's doing the work, who gets to make the choices, how much do you get to draw for your own interests and passions. That's sort of sections A and B, right, of the Trudicot. And somebody who's working on a lesson or a unit that involves technology might say, one of my purposes of this unit and the way we use tech in that is that we want to give kids greater agency, right? Okay. C and D is really about communication and collaboration. So in other words, it's around, what if we really want to facilitate those global connections, the ability of kids to work with students and adults and experts, outside of the school walls. And again, a set of questions that you would ask yourself, where you would say, if one of the purposes of integrating tech into this is we want kids communicating and collaborating more, some of those critical 4 C's factors, here's some questions we might ask ourselves about how we've designed things. You get into E and F. E is really around authentic work and real-world work. F is around sort of deeper disciplinary thinking. In other words, are we really starting to get at important concepts of the subject area as opposed to just stupid minutia and trivia like we normally do? Or is it just sort of school fake like we usually do? Do we have the opportunity to make a contribution to the world outside and so on? G really gets at sort of deeper thinking stuff. So Are we going beyond that low-level stuff? Do we have the opportunity to design and create and make, to initiate, to be entrepreneurial, to do some metacognition and reflection along the way, right? Then a little bit at the end around technology for technology's sake, and are we avoiding that, or are we using it in meaningful ways that add value? And sort of this alignment or assessment piece around, is everything all sort of aligned together? So that's the Trudicot, and this is version 1, and we'll take any and all feedback. Lissa, you mentioned Coattail. I shared this with Jeff Utecht several months ago, last time I saw him, and he was pretty excited about it, so I don't know what he shared with you around this at all. But what we do with this thing is we don't just hand it to people, right? But what we do is we start throwing videos up of kids and teachers using tech, and then we put teachers and administrators to work. We're like, is that any good or not? And at first, we don't give them this at all. We just show them a video like, is this good tech integration or not? And we usually show some kind of like mystery Skype activity where the kids are all engaged and they're excited and they're trying to guess somebody else's location somewhere else in the world. But, and like teachers and administrators love it. They're like, oh, it's so great. The kids are so excited and engaged and they're doing blah, 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 whatever. But then you start to dissect it and you realize there's nothing there. There's no substance in the entire lesson. And by the time we're done with it, they sort of have this cognitive disequilibrium, right? Because now what they thought was awesome actually really sucked because there's no learning in there whatsoever other than sort of a 20 questions game about a location. It's like holding a postcard up to your forehead. So then we say, so what if you were trying to add some stuff in here that would make it better, right? And that's sort of our code phrase with my team is make it better. And then we would say, well, let's pick something. Like, let's say we wanted to pick student agency, right? We wanted to give kids greater agency. Look at those, answer those questions in sections A and B, and then how would you redesign the activity if you wanted your answers to that to be different, right? If you wanted to focus on communication and collaboration, if that was the focus for this activity, answer the questions there, and then how would you redesign it so that the answers to those questions would be different? And that is turning out to be a really powerful vehicle for changing educators' thinking and practice, and the kind of dialogues that they have about their tech integration. Because now what's going on is that they have a chance to roll up their sleeves and get to work, right? And we just show them video after video, different levels, different subjects, whatever, and we just keep hitting it, right? Pick a section of the Trudicot, answer the questions. If you wanted the lesson to be different on those questions, how would you redesign it? And we're finding that even fairly non-tech savvy educators can do a pretty good job once they start having some concrete look-fors to work with, something that's more concrete than TPAC and SAMR, for example. So I think that's an example of the kind of work that I try to do with folks, where as quickly as possible I want to get them doing, not just sitting.
Awesome. So spectacular. We did some quick troubleshooting, so everyone seems happy. We have viewers down at the bottom. We have 10 people in the room with us. So thank God for Google Hangouts. It is our go-to standby. So a little Google Hangouts on air. So I saw Alyssa. Do you want to pose a question or two? Especially, I love the thinking around Coattail. And so if there's a little more space to explore that, go ahead and jump in.
When we used this with Coattail, I had no idea that it had come from Scott, and so when I saw it, I'm like, wait, I've seen this before. But so what we did is Coattail is the Certificate of Educational Technology and Information Literacy with Jeff Utecht, and in course 5, which is the last course, you create your own unit fully integrating technology with the goal of redefining a unit that are on the SAMR. And so we used this to help guide our creation of the unit. And then when we watched other people's videos, we used this to give them feedback. So it was nice because it still, it did focus us, but I still was able to watch other teachers' videos and be like, well, it's not really like, I mean, the most awesome thing ever, but I felt kind of like I also had a hard time like saying like no for some of these things. It was like a hard balance to find. So.
Yeah. Good.
So Liz, I have a question for you. So you said
Yeah.
that you did some observation and used the rubric a couple times before you looked at
Yeah.
each other, and we do that a lot because we want people to get comfortable talking about somebody else's lessons, right, before we have to do your own, which we're more defensive about. I wonder how much Jeff spent on redesign, right? Because that's really critical. It's not just do you like it or not, or does it answer the questions, but how would you change it? How would you make it better? And that's really where our best dialogues are coming from. Did Jeff do much of that with you guys?
No, like literally he just turned this into a Google form where, you know, it was B, talk time. And then you had the options of students, teachers, both.
Right.
And then that Google form, like I have a Google form that 20 other people filled out with their answers to all of these things. But it wasn't very open-ended, and so when I got the feedback, it wasn't super helpful to me. But I think partly because we're also working online and we don't have any synchronous things like this, so we don't know each other very well. Like we've blogged together for five courses, so we kind of know each other, but not like I would know. Like there's people in this course where I could, you know, go to lunch with them and be awesome.
Right.
But I don't think we had a close enough relationship where anyone was at that point that they could give critical feedback.
Got it. Okay. And that's really where the power comes from. It's the dialogue between, okay, so here's how we just answered the questions about whatever lesson or unit we're looking at. And now let's hack through it in dialogue about how to change it and fix it and make it better on the directions that we want to go. Right.
That would have
and that's
been
key.
awesome. Yeah.
Right. Sorry you didn't get that part. That's the kind of work we're doing with teachers here. And, you know, when I do workshops, it's really good. Sorry. Okay. So that's just like one example of sort of how I put people to work. Justin, should I show a couple more? You want to go in a different direction? What do you want to do here?
Let's see if anyone else in the room that wants to ask a question can right now. If not, we have a few questions on standby, and then Scott, you are free to show whatever you want to show, please.
Okay.
Like I said, you're the master, and I'm just the student as well. Anyone else in the room want to throw questions? You can also throw questions at the chat if you want, at the chat window.
Yeah, it's no fun monologuing, so somebody chime in.
Righto.
I have a question. Just curious, Scott, you'd mentioned, and you're right, administrators at the district office level and the school level sometimes want to go too many different ways and don't really do anything that well. I was just curious, from your experience, is it the support of the superintendent, whatever school district that you're working with, that is really decided, all right, let's focus on maybe one or two things as opposed to 20 or 30, and just curious, or if not, what was kind of the selling point from your end to say, hey, let's just kind of stay focused on a few things, let's do those really well and then build on those, because I don't see that too often in PD or in a lot of school districts.
No, I don't either, and I think partly that's because there's so many sort of different outside pressures coming in on schools that they're trying to respond to multiple things simultaneously. But, you know, one of the things we know about successful leaders and successful organizations is that they have the ability to focus on what's really important, right? And to go deep on those and to make sure that sort of those are working well for them. So, you know, like, for example, I was talking with my boss at the AEA, the Area Education Agency that I work for, and we have our first meeting with the superintendents in August, and one of the things we're going to have them do is we're going to have them list all of the different things that they're doing right now in their district, right? All the different initiatives and programs and whatever. And then we're going to ask them to draw on a piece of paper, literally with like a pencil and a piece of paper, how do they fit together, right? How do you make sense of them in your own head? And that's going to be hard for them, right? But then we're going to flip it around and say, if this is hard for you, imagine how hard it is for all the different people in your district, right, who aren't even in charge of all this, but are trying to respond to all these varying things that you're throwing at them. And if you ask them to draw how all this stuff fits together, what would their drawings look like? Would they look like yours? And if not, you got problems, right? So, you know, how do we start creating those conversation and dialogue opportunities for superintendents and educators where they can start to come agreement in terms of what are we trying to make happen here, right? And if we're all going off in different directions, we can't even agree what we're trying to make happen, how are we going to get systemic reform and change to happen, right? And so again, what would a professional learning experience look like that really drove that home for Soups? And right now, our best bet is make them draw it, and then talk about it, and then extend it to their own organization and say, now what? And so again, that idea of sort of immersing people in it and having them do the work and think pretty hard about it, and then be like, oh crap, now what are we going to do? Right? And I think we're going to probably shift a couple districts in terms of their ability to focus because of that exercise, I'm hoping, along with some follow-up that we do to say, all right, how can we help?
Awesome. So a question from the chat. This is from Ashley, who does quite a bit of PD in her job, and she's applying for a new job. Everyone in UKSTL gets promoted at some point, and so perhaps this is Ashley's turn. Ashley does quite a bit of PD, and she is wondering, you know, she has fixed times. She's wondering, like, how do we get teachers learning and doing quickly without holding back a lot of the teachers in the room that already have a lot of positive experiences? Like, how do you manage, you know, all the difference that's coming at you in a school building?
Right. So we try to create very open-ended learning tasks, right, with different levels of challenge. So, you know, depending on what the task is, you might be an expert, you might be a novice, you might be somewhere in between, you might be brand new to it. You know, how can we create learning opportunities where you go in, you can intersect that at whatever level you need to? And so that may be differentiated groups, right? So instead of doing a one-size-fits-all, maybe we break you up into small, tiny groups, maybe as small as 2 or 3. So that you can get exactly what you need, right? And then we have different materials or learning experiences set up for you to interact with. Maybe it's just a conversation that's sort of very broad, like the Trudicot exercise that I walked you through. So whether you have lots of experience with tech integration or none, you can benefit from interacting with people at all different levels, and that sort of open-end discussion folds in everybody. And everything in between. You know, we have done some very specific tech tool training where we're trying to get people up and running on a specific system or software or, you know, whatever. And we will maybe even have challenge cards. So we'll just throw challenge cards in front of people and say, if you're already fluent in this, see if you know how to do this, see if you can figure out how to do this, and we'll come by and see how you're doing and give you tips. So, you know, ways for people to extend their learning or whatever. We do buddying systems where, you know, you're paired up with a buddy and they make sure that you're on track and moving along as need to. If you're a little slower than the rest of the group, you know, you have somebody who's your dedicated handholder, for example. We do all kinds of things to try and just, you know, hit people where they are, even when they're all simultaneously with you. But, you know, the best way to do that is to allow them to choose. So one of the things we're seeing is that, I don't know how familiar you are with this unconference format where participants choose their own topics, right? So instead of a scheduled PD where we say, here's what we're going to do for the half day, is that instead we said, here's some time we have to learn together. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to do? What do you want to learn about? What do you want to get better at? What do you want to, you know, dialogue around? And then they come up with the topics, and then they walk with their own feet. You know, they vote with their feet and decide which way do they want to go. And those EdCamp ideas, or those unconference ideas, where participants get to pick the topics that they want to focus on and work on and think about and dialogue around, are really popular, but they're not utilized very often within systems. Like their regional events or state events will have like an EdCamp Iowa or an EdCamp Omaha, whatever, but we never have like EdCamp, you know, Fayette County High School 2, right? Whatever, where, you know, just for the day, the high school staff get together and be like, all right, what do we want to do? What do we want to talk about? You know, here's like 4 initiatives that we got going on. Let's break out and hit some stuff. And, you know, that kind of choice is another way to really allow for differentiation of people's needs and interests.
All right. Excellent. Thanks. How about we try and take another question from the room? So someone that's in the room and on video, turn your video and audio on and then ask away.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Ellen.
We actually were trying to do the unconference ed camp at our school, and you know, they're like, we found when we do them large, like we just had Ed Camp Honolulu, it was really successful. But it's those people who are really interested in ed tech that are showing up. So do you think that, or just, you know, not necessarily technology, but those are the people who are showing up because it's important to them, and it's not always important to everyone on campus necessarily. So when you have those on-campus unconferences or ed camps, like one of the things I was kind of worried about was maybe it turning into a big bitch session you know, because they're all together and they complain about everything, but maybe that's not even necessarily a bad thing. So do you, like, have you had experience with those ones on campuses, and do you have any strategies that have helped make them successful, like other than like have people volunteer to run sessions if people don't volunteer to put ideas up or anything like that?
Sure. So we've got districts here in Iowa that are setting those topics ahead of time, and that might be a solicitation of the staff, right? What do you think are some things that we as a staff need to talk about, or what are some things that you'd really like to spend some more time dialoguing around or learning? And that might be a mix of topics the district wants you to talk about versus topics that come from the staff together, right? And I think another thing is to really separate out the idea of an ed camp or an unconference from tech tools, because your topics of conversation might be things like, how do we get kids to do deeper thinking work? Or, what can we do in our classes to help kids be better writers? Or why do we have so many poor kids that are, suspended compared to other kids, or whatever? I mean, there's all kinds of things within schools that have nothing to do with tech that would be fantastic to talk about, and we just never do, right? So if we can come up with a diverse set of things to chat about and give people choice to move around as desired, then you should address, I think, much of that problem in terms of people checking out or not being interested. And then, you mentioned the idea around you just don't want it to become bitch sessions, is that you really you want to emphasize to everybody that this should be sort of open dialogue, and you want people to get stuff out and clear the air, but they should be solution-oriented and problem-solving oriented, right? Not just griping, because otherwise, what's the purpose, right? And we have this precious time together. Let's work towards solutions and really use that time as best we can. So, and I think for the most part, people respond to that.
All right, super. Let's do another question from the chat. We'll go sort of back and forth for those not in the room, and we'll watch Scott's time a little bit because I know he wants to watch the game tonight. So another question from the chat, Scott, was around backward mapping at the district level. This is a question from Colleen, who was asking, do we have like a template or process that we can use to help our sort of long-term backward mapping process, so that we are taking sort of positive steps that lead to a long-term goal that we want to get to? Thoughts about that?
I don't have a backward mapping PD template, or it's kind of like strategic planning in a way. And I'm sure that there's some stuff out there that's floating around. I think so much of that is contextual, right? So, let's say that two different districts are both trying to get to the same destination. I'll just pick something here, like we're both trying to have our teachers operate in highly functional PLCs, right? What one district needs to do to get there is going to be completely different than what another district needs to do to get there, because of different history and context and people and whatever. And so I think it takes some really careful designs and some really sort of thoughtful intention where some smart people get together and say, here's where our needs are and here's where we're trying to go, and then what set of experiences over a block of time would get people there in a substantive, meaningful way. So, that's about how we do it. I don't really have like sort of a silver bullet planning form or anything. We just kind of sit down and try to map backwards, what we think folks need in dialogue with the people in that organization.
This is a little follow-up from me then, Scott. Have you been using design thinking much in this space, sort of at the district level, to sort of think about how do we achieve sort of our long-term goals? This whole group was sort of introduced to design thinking last week. So I wanted to, how much are you messing with design thinking right now?
I'm not a master of design thinking techniques like Dr. Nash, so I would say most of that's probably more informal than formal. We don't have a set of techniques in our pockets that we pull out and be like, okay, we're going to do this and we do that. But we do, again, spend a lot of time talking about and planning for and thinking about what an effective journey would look like over time. So would maybe be more effective if we used some design thinking techniques? Probably. And that's where I'm still a learner in that area. Always more to learn.
Yep, I know. It never, ever, ever ends. I can't wait till we figure out how to use the Oculus Rift in PD. Wow, what fun that will that be. Okay, let's hop back to the room. Another question from the room. Anyone? Mike, you had a question in email. You want to throw that question out?
I sent 2. Which one in particular?
Whatever strikes you as the most important one at the moment, Mike.
Whatever you want to hear me jabber about.
Let me just pull it here. Hang on. I sent him 2. Momentito.
So if you're okay with me picking one, I liked your second question better, Mike, which is we're frequently doing things like 4-hour trainings. There's frequently large blocks of time. I just wrapped up a 2-day training that Ashley had to sit through. Poor Ashley is in the room. Spent so much time with me the last 2 days. I'm sure she is sick of me at this point. So we're frequently dealing with these large time blocks. How do we try to keep our participants engaged? That was one of your questions. Is that correct, Mike? You want to add anything to that? No, he feels good.
Nope.
Feels good with that articulation. Go ahead, Scott.
So you put them to work, right? I mean, an all-day workshop is really awful if you're just sitting there. But if you're busy, working on stuff and talking with people and figuring out things and getting your thinking challenged and solving problems and making progress, the time flies. I had an opportunity this past year to work with one district in Illinois, and we had 7 days together over the course of the year. I had their entire leadership team, all 40 of them, every administrator at the building level, every administrator at the district level, and we spent 7 days talking together. That's 50, 60 hours, and then that could have been awful if I just stood up and yapped at them all day every day. It would have been terrible. But we put them to work, so we had them working on meaningful things. We had built in lots of conversation and dialogue and movement. We used a variety of different facilitation techniques to mix it up. I probably never talked for more than 10, 15 minutes at a time at most before it was back to them to get to work again. They were working in small groups. Time flew. We made it fun. We took plenty of breaks so they could stretch and get some fresh air. I mean, all those things that we know that we need. And, if you design a day around that or half a day around that, you'd be surprised how fast it goes.
All right, super. Any other question from the room at this point?
Thank you.
Oh, good. There was a thank you from Mike. Yeah, Mike, I feel like we're going to chat after. Can we do about 10 more minutes, Scott? Are you okay with about 10 more minutes?
I'm good for as long as you want. So I don't think the game starts for another half hour or so. So as long as you want me,
well, whatever works for you. We want to watch your time and make sure, it's not like you're getting paid to teach this one. Although we need to talk about actually paying you to teach one of these coming up here.
I'm good. I'm talking to Jason about it. I'm waiting for the call.
I know Jason's in charge of things nowadays. I guess you heard.
Mm-hmm. Somebody's got to be.
Clearly, I am not competent to do such things. So, awesome. Okay, so anyone else in the room? If not, we have a couple more in our emails. Go ahead if someone else in the room wants to ask. So Larissa from the chat earlier asked are there a few specific examples of districts that you have seen doing a great job? And could you potentially point us toward those few districts? I see you're shaking your head. Uh-oh, that's a shame. Go ahead.
And I don't live in the world of professional development, so I'm not really up on sort of who's doing a great job with it. Almost every district I see is doing a pretty crappy job with their professional learning time. It's too dispersed. It's too many things spread out over. They're trying to cover too much. Right, so they're trying to hit 8 different things. They sort of are operating under this model of, well, if we just talk about it to them for 30 minutes, then they'll get it and they'll do it. As opposed to recognizing that, it's probably going to take 10 to 20 hours of immersive work for them to really get good at it, and you sitting up there lecturing at them for 30 minutes isn't that. But we got all this other stuff we got to talk about too, right? And they got to also be able to do, well, guess what? You can do 20 different things poorly, but that doesn't mean any one of them will stick. Might it be better to do 1 or 2 well? And that's sort of the problem I see with folks. So, and I haven't seen anybody really bust out of that for the most part.
Man, that is a shame. I feels like we could do. There's a lot of very fertile ground for a lot of. I don't even know how to leverage that, but seems like there's a lot of ground that could be covered, trying to sort of coach districts through that process. So as a follow-up to that, two big topics that we cover in this class that, since we have a few extra minutes with you, I'd love to get your thoughts about. We sort of covered professional learning communities a bit up to this point. What thoughts do you have around PLCs and how relevant or not relevant that is in the PD world and as a tool to leverage tech?
Mm-hmm. So I think the idea behind PLCs is really great. It's this idea that you have a small, close, Rolla-like peer group that's focused on something that they're trying to make happen, right? And then they're hopefully collecting data along the way and then coming back to look at it and then make appropriate changes as necessary to accomplish their goals. I think PLCs have been corrupted a little bit by sort of the standardized testing and accountability regime, so that now in most places PLCs are simply collect some learning outcome data as defined by either summative or formative bubble assessments, do some item analysis, break that out, and then make some changes, right? And I think about learning outcomes much more broadly than that, and I think about the fact that the administrators have really taken hold of the PLCs, and they've taken away sort of choice and direction from the teacher groups. And so in my head, a true PLC would be one where the teachers come together and say, what do we need to work on, and how do we know? And they would decide what kind of data to collect rather than the administrator or the system. And they would say, where are our kids struggling and how do we know? And they would decide how to figure that out and monitor it. And then they would decide, you know, what do we need to do to learn and improve in order to get better at that and help our kids with that, rather than somebody dictating that to them. And so most aspects of the PLC process have been taken over centrally rather than residing down where they're most useful and helpful, which is down in people who are actually doing the work. And so I think conceptually PLCs are a great idea. I think operationally they've fallen off in most places. And I think about this concept of PLN, which people are using now, which is the term used for these sort of loose online communities of practice. So it's not just that you have a local community of practice with some Rolla-like peers, whoever happens to work with you and live near you geographically, but now you have Rolla-like peers all around the world that you're connecting with through Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus and blogs and whatever, right, Pinterest, and you're learning from them in a more informal manner. And most people will tell you that learning is actually much more powerful and valuable and informational and helpful than the PLC work that they're doing. And part of it is because now you get to choose who you learn from, you get to choose what you learn about, you get to choose the areas that you want to get better at rather than somebody dictating to you. You get to make all those choices, and that's why it's more relevant and meaningful to you. So, that kind of more authentic learning that we do outside school in these online communities of practice that we're calling professional learning networks, or PLNs, as opposed to the PLCs, seems to be more valuable for people. And again, it's because of that choice and direction. So what would PLCs look like if teachers had the choice to sit down at the beginning of the year and said, here are 3 things we know our kids are really struggling with. And here's how we know, right? Here's the data that we've collected on that. And it might be from bubble assessments, it might not. It might be from, rubrics or performance assessments we've developed in-house or whatever, right? And then here's our plan to get better at that during the year with our kids, and here's how we're going to monitor it along the way. I mean, that would be very different than most school systems' PLC process, and I think it would be much, much better.
All right, that is perfect, because PLNs was the next thing that I was going to turn to. And you've had the chance to work with Will Richardson in this space, and so everyone in this space, in the UKSTL space at this point, most of us are rocking some type of personal learning network. I guess the question that I think most of the folks would have in the room, and again, guys, keep typing over in the chat or throwing questions up on the Google Hangout room. The question that most of the folks in this space would have is, how do we get, cranky teacher, or just not even a cranky teacher, just your average teacher, like, for instance, we have Abby and Brent are in the room. They're 2nd or 3rd year teachers just out of their pre-service programs doing great things at the elementary level. How do we get teachers that have that, they got a lot of skill, but if they didn't join up with the UKSTL and the UK Teacher Leader Masters, like, they probably would not have built a pretty robust technology PLN. How do we get even average teachers to start building PLNs?
Right. So the technique that we're using is that we have collected, and in fact are recollecting right now on my blog through an initiative called The Push, sets of people and blogs and accounts that you can follow that of people that do what you do. So you teach 3rd grade elementary, you teach 8th grade math, you teach 10th grade science, whatever your thing is, right? You're a special educator, you're a librarian. How can we connect you with a set of people that is doing awesome work that does what you do, right? And so, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, you should follow Scott McLeod. He's a great tech blogger, blah, blah, blah. He talks about leadership. But if you're a 3rd grade teacher or an 8th grade math teacher, you could care less about tech leadership, right? You care about 3rd grade or 8th grade math, right? But can we connect you with other 3rd grade teachers who are doing great work, who would feed you ideas and resources and lesson plans and teaching ideas? And, oh, I tried this tech tool in my class and it bombed, but here's why. But we tried again next week and it was awesome. And by the way, I read this thing over here that you would find useful too. I mean, sure, right? That would be great for you as a 3rd grade teacher or 8th grade math teacher or 10th grade science teacher, whatever. So the thing is that can we collect these groups of different resources, right, that you could follow? Right, and then what we do is we'll sit down with that 3rd grade teacher or a clump of 3rd grade teachers and say, all right, let me show you something. I'm going to show you like 3 blog posts from 3 different 3rd grade teachers. Just read those for a little while. And they're done, they're like, yeah, these are good. These are really good. I'm like, would you like to get stuff like this like anytime you wanted? Like, oh, yeah, okay. Right, and be like, all right, let's set you up. Right, and now the hook has been planted. Because it's role-alike, it's directly relevant, it's meaningful to them. It's not some random laundry list. I'm like, okay, look, here's Feedly. Or you could subscribe to this person. Anytime this person shared, it would just show up there for you. Or, by the way, here's this thing called Twitter. And this person's on there, like, popping out 8 resources a day that would just be super helpful to you because you're also a 3rd grade teacher, right? And pretty soon, you know, that's sort of our approach, and it's working pretty well. But you have to have those clusters up front that you can put people into, right? Because the middle school art teacher could give a crap about, you know, some awesome Spanish blogger. But if you can hook her up with another middle school art teacher or two that will feed her good stuff, she's in. And so we did that back in 2009. Those lists are a little outdated. So now what we're doing is we're updating those lists, and I'm soliciting the stuff on my blog right now. And I would say probably by the end of July, early August, we'll have a new set of lists. So that whatever you do, whether you're an agricultural education teacher or a computer science teacher, or you know you teach social studies, you know, to 6th graders or whatever, we have some people we can hook you into, and then it's just sort of a matter of getting you in front of a little bit of that content enough to get you hooked, and then being all right. Now let's get you set up. But again, that's interest-driven, right, learning as opposed to centrally driven learning.
Absolutely. Awesome to hear we are updating that. I used that exact list of blogs today, and we'll link it up here in a second. I'll go find the Moving Forward wiki and the long list of blogs on that wiki.
Yeah, and it's old and spammy, so that's why we're getting it fixed. So stay tuned for version 2.
Yeah, spectacular. Can't wait. I'm using it all the time these days. So let us know how to help on that side of the game. So I have a follow-up question, somewhat of a follow-up question from Larissa, who is concerned, you know, the longer she's with us, the more she hears from really smart folks like yourself, the more she is concerned that her school is further and further behind. Her question is, how does one politely tell them they are not so awesome as they think they are?
So I don't know, what's your purpose? What do you hope to achieve by telling them that?
Sorry, we're rolling with the Google Hangout. She's in the chat, so I don't know how quickly Larissa can respond.
Sure. Right. I mean, you can't just come up to somebody and be like, hey, by the way, you suck. I mean, that doesn't move them forward.
And my own experience, too, I can jump in on this, because I've been working a lot with the Kentucky Department of Education. You have to be smart politically, and it takes time. Right. You know, we're launching STEAM Academy, a whole new high school here in town, and it took like three or 4 months of trust building with the leadership team before we started to, you know, really start to have the hard conversations like, hey, are we really doing a good job personalizing learning? We're not.
Right.
It's not a secret, but you can't just hit them in the face with that. Can't hit them between the eyes. And
No.
yeah,
So
go ahead,
just,
Scott.
Yeah, so Justin, the distinction I make is between push and pull, right? So the push is kind of like, hey, the world is changing and you got to get moving and you're behind and there's all, the global economic competitiveness and our kids aren't tech savvy enough in school and they're not literate and blah, blah, and you got to go, go, go. That's all push stuff, right? The pull stuff is when you show somebody something cool that's happening somewhere else and be like, would you like your kids to do that? Right? Like, think about what you're doing with your kids and then look at like that awesome project that those kids did over there in that third grade class. Like, would it be cool? Like, do you think it would be cool if your kids did stuff like that? Yes? Oh, okay. Well, then let's talk about how to get there. And it's that immersion in a different vision of what can be that's desirable that will pull them toward that, right? So again, just like sort of the blog post idea is that, so you got a reluctant, cranky teacher or leader, right? And you say, so I just want to show you a couple of things. Like, look at this, look at that. What do you think about that? Does that look like pretty cool learning? Does that look like kids are engaged and excited? Does it look like it's deep enough to satisfy curriculum and standards requirements, whatever? Yeah, okay. Isn't that better than our stupid textbook worksheet stuff? Yeah, okay. So how could we work toward that together? How can I help you? How can I support you? Let's talk to them. Let's see what their journey sounded like. I mean, that's, again, the pull, right? And people will pull. And that seems to be much more effective than the push.
All right. I'll let the room open up. There was a pretty hard question posted in the chat, which pulled on one of the research articles that we read last week.
I'm ready.
You are ready for it now?
Sure,
it's one that I struggle with, too, and I'll tell you, we just ran these Kentucky Go Digital trainings all over the state, and we did not do a good job of this. Mm-hmm. The question is around evaluation. It's from Ashley in the chat. And so how do we try to understand the success of our professional development? We read a research paper last week that I don't know if you guys used. It's a little older, so you might have used it in Minnesota, around from Gayton and McNewen on developing a high-quality evaluation model to try to get to are changes actually happening in schools. How do we evaluate our professional development, and thoughts about getting beyond just the 1 in 5 scale?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think you have to think about it in terms of two levels. There's how is your experience in the moment. So in other words, you just spent 2 hours in the professional learning experience, or half a day, or whatever. How was that for you? Right, and I just threw up in the Google Hangout the link to the form that we tend to use for that, sort of a generic form. But the longer term stuff that has to do more with, Justin, can you hear me?
Yep, good.
Okay, all right, sorry, I got a lot of people blinking out, so I wasn't quite sure if I'd lost the connection. The longer term issue is that you've got to have some goals and outcomes set up front for what are you trying to achieve, right? And again, that goes back to that idea of a long-term systemic plan for professional learning. And what are you trying to achieve with it? So I think most districts have no idea what they're trying to achieve with it because they don't know what the desired outcome is, they don't know how to backward map, and thus they don't know how to monitor along the way and at the end.
Yeah, it's certainly the case for us in the trainings we just ran with the Department of Ed. They don't really know, honestly. They just wanted some nice tech trainings for teachers. We delivered with great evaluations. But long term, do I know if this is going to impact student learning? I mean, I don't know it. The State Department doesn't know it. So
right.
I don't know. I struggle with that.
Right. My team's getting requests from districts who are like, we've got 6 half days to fill. Can you fill them for us? I'm like, for the purpose of what? They're like, we don't care. Just fill it. Right? That's bad. I mean, we'll happily go in and work with teachers because we'll take every opportunity we can get to work with educators, but that's not good leadership and good planning. And so I think the question that needs to keep coming back is, what kind of impact are we trying to make? How do we know it? Classic do for stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. It is a hard question. It's one, Jason would definitely maybe have some great answers around. Who's one of our better researchers here. But I think we can get asked. I think we can get to the implementation stage. Like, I think we could do follow-ups. I don't know if you've ever done sort of like follow-up 3 or 4, 6 months later, going back with the teacher and seeing like, hey, can you show me evidence of something that's changed during the last 6 months for you? Have you done much of that?
So we're actually, my team oriented itself this year around the influencer framework, right? And one of the critical breakthroughs for my team has been defining the desired outcome in terms of student work products, not teacher work products. So in other words, let's say that you asked us to come in and help you learn how to do stop motion for the purpose of kids showing their knowledge of science concepts, right? The evidence of that for us is how many kids made a stop motion video that appropriately and powerfully displayed their understanding of science concepts. So it's not just that you had a good day with us at the workshop. It's not even that you can make a stop motion video yourself as a teacher. It's that, did we actually see some kids actually do it, right? And was it good work when they did? And that evidence, those work products, are really sort of how we're trying to monitor our impact.
Very good. Okay, let's take another question from the room. If Scott still has a couple of minutes, you let us know. Let us know, Scott. You have been more than generous with your time. And Jason has them extremely well trained in turning audio and video on and off, and so that's why their audio and video click in and out. We tightly manage when people's audio and video are on or off, and so don't worry when audio and video come in and out. Jason has them very well trained.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried. I'll also note that Nash's background is evaluation, so he would also be a great person to ask those questions of, in terms of how do we know if we're accomplishing what we say we're trying to accomplish. So there's those of us with research backgrounds, we try to figure that out ourselves, but then there's people that have specific evaluation backgrounds like Nash that are even better at it.
And for those on the Google Hangout page, I'm copying over the links, and I'll try and make a copy of the entire group chat and make sure we get that posted as well. So we have someone in the room here, Eric. Eric, if you're with us, turn your audio and video on. Eric is more of a server-side guy who is finding himself increasingly between the tech staff and the learning staff for Orlando Public Schools, a very large district in the United States. And that very large district in the United States is in the process of going to one-to-one. And Eric finds himself a bit in the middle of that. So, Eric, any questions from Scott for you?
Well, just to give you a little bit of background, we're 190 schools, roughly, 10th largest in the nation, Orange County Public Schools. Yep. We started an initiative at the beginning of last year with 7 digital pilot schools, all with one-to-one devices. We brought on late last year 2 BYOD schools. And we're not adding any more for the next year. We really want to be able to capture as much data from those schools as possible, and not just, the first year was just a huge learning curve, and we're still in that learning curve even through the second year. So, but what we're seeing is there's a gap between teaching and learning in the technology department. And teaching and learning has these mandates, and they kind of drive the bus, which they should. But there's mandates given to the technology department, and the technology department, especially those working in the schools, don't understand why things are coming down. There's a huge communication gap between those two departments. So I'm trying to figure out ways in that we can bridge that gap. We're doing a team building day next Thursday, and I've actually got teaching and learning to come and speak to our groups, so at least we can hear face-to-face, because it's really rare that we actually get all in one group. It's only 4 times a year. Anything you can suggest to bridge that gap between teaching and learning, and not just the technology department, but all departments within a district, especially a large district of 20,000 employees and almost 200,000 students.
Sure. So I think communication is key, obviously, right? And building those shared understandings requires time together. And so some of the things that you said that sort of resonated with me were things like, we rarely get to meet together. Or when they do show up, they speak to us as opposed to with us. And so how can we structure conversation spaces where we lay out what we think is happening and what we're trying to make happen, and whatever discrepancies are between the two? Are we willing enough to be vulnerable to the other side and say things like, here's something we're really struggling with, but we need to accomplish. Is this something that you can help us with? You know, and vice versa. How do we foster interdependency between the groups, you know, around some shared goals and some shared outcomes? All of that requires some pretty skilled facilitation and leadership. It sounds like right now, whoever's in charge of bridging those gaps and making those conversations happen isn't really sort of making it occur at the level it needs to. You know, I work in an organization that only has about 250 employees, and we've got the same issues just in that much smaller group, right? Because we're a very geographically dispersed workforce. And one of the things that I've been asked to do over the course of the next year is get some groups together and have exactly that conversation, like, why do our meetings always suck? Why are they always so unproductive? And, you know, how can we never get anything done? And how can we help each other across units and across departments when we rarely see each other? Because, you know, you're kind of working on that, we're kind of working on that, but we never talk. And, you know, one of the requests of me by my boss this coming year is to start bridging some of those gaps and help people come together and start to make sense of some of that. And somebody needs to do that down there. So I don't have any easy answers for you, but, you know, I think it's pretty clear that you guys need more time together. You need the opportunity to have some pretty deep, rich, substantive conversations where you realize where your mutual overlaps are and how you can work together to make that happen. And this idea of we're going to show up and talk at you or speak to you, right, and inform you while you sit passively, that doesn't work, right? But if we sat together and say, what problem are we trying to solve together? Now let's work on solving it. What are the pieces of it? What are the components? What do we need to start putting into place and the steps that need us to get there? And let's figure out those out together. That's much more productive. So maybe you're doing some of that. If so, great. But it sounds like not enough.
Great. Thank you very much for the help.
Or lack thereof. You got empathy.
So everyone, I want to introduce Kai Thomas.
Yeah.
Kai is a visiting scholar for CASTLE, joining us from the University of San Diego's Mobile Technology
Learning Center.
Mobile Technology and Learning Center
Is the center I work for.
Yes.
The school is the School of Educational Sciences.
Awesome. And literally just off the plane, has come in, joining us for UKSTL week with our doctoral students. Starts tomorrow at 3 p.m. So we are going to have our hands full. For those of you that want to come spend more time with us, I think PhD, it's out that we're recruiting the next cohort online now. So Kai, we are chatting with Scott McLeod. This is Scott here. I'll pull up his video. We are talking all about professional learning in education, and you're from the Mobile Technologies Lab at University of San Diego. So you don't even have your backpack yet.
No.
But thoughts, since she's from a Mobile Technologies Lab, and we'll link it up over here in both chats. How do we leverage mobile? Any thoughts on how to leverage mobile for this? I mean, all the teachers are rocking this in their pocket already.
Right. So, you know, it kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about online communities of practice, right? And if we have educators connected to various social media channels and information channels in ways that are informative and productive, then the mobile, of course, just expands their reach in terms of anytime, anywhere learning and dialogue, right? So now we're not tethered to a desktop device, but we can go anywhere. So, you know, I sort of live this in terms of, you know, I've got 5 minutes to kill in my dentist's office, so I'll pull up Facebook and dialogue with somebody or learn from somebody, or I'll dip into my Twitter stream while I'm waiting in line at the bank, or, you know, I've got 10 minutes to kill before my next phone call. I'll pop into my blog reader and read 1 or 2 things and maybe leave a comment, right? And that ongoing learning in little bits and chunks is enabled by the mobility of the devices, because I can do that anywhere at any time that's convenient for me. And so I'm sure that Kai could talk much more about sort of the affordances of mobile in terms of facilitating professional learning. But that's sort of how, you know, I think most educators are trying to get just to that point right now, and that's a huge step for most of them, and I'm sure she's probably on the cutting edge of something.
Oh, we just froze. We were doing great. I don't know if Scott's froze for others. Hopefully we'll jump back in. Pros for you too. All right, Noise. In the meantime, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit more, Kai, and talk. Do you all do much PD at the center?
We are starting to break into that. We have a professional development specialist, and what we've come to do is a lot of our research projects that we've done in the past are now influencing our professional development model. So we're in the beginning stages of actually implementing those models. I don't have much with the professional development side. It's kind of a separate branch, but we have collaboration meetings to make sure that what we're teaching at different schools is being reinforced by what we're seeing when we go in to do research. And it's pretty interesting because a lot of the professional development that's being given is just not conducive to how we expect our teachers to be implementing technology in the classroom. And so that is probably the main key thing, is getting them to understand the technology also as a means of not just social connection, but how to use it in your classrooms for an educational purpose and to gain those like higher order thinking skills with students. So,
yeah. Right up. And Scott threw in one of the chat windows that we put her to work right away. Absolutely. I mean, sorry. You show up to CASA, you're here. We're just going to roll right away. We met up in Indianapolis.
Yes, for UCA.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Good to see you back in the middle of the country. So we'll chat more. Hopefully we will get Scott back here. There's a few more questions. And in the meantime, let's sort of reflect on everything that Scott sort of brought to the table so far. We've covered a ton of ground. Okay, good. Scott's popping back in the room here. That looks like it'll work here in just a second. So what are one or two, if you have one last question, people throw it in the chat. We have a question from Colleen. It's around accountability, Scott, and I'm hesitant to get into it. I don't want to get into accountability too broadly. Well, we could just talk for 4 hours probably on accountability, and you can talk to it if you want. Just don't feel the need to dive too deeply. The specific question that she was asking was a little bit around walkthroughs as an accountability tool, and so how do we have some sense of accountability?
So is the question, how do we use walkthroughs as an effective accountability tool?
The question was probably a bit broader than that, but I'm content to just tackle the walkthroughs question simply because instructional walkthroughs is what she was referring to, because I feel like there is a lot of frustration around the accountability system and not taking any of this into effect. We're launching a new accountability system in Kentucky, and it's not something that teachers are necessarily rewarded for doing.
Okay.
I'm hesitant to jump too deeply into that, but you can if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So
okay,
here's the issue, right? So Richard Elmore always talks about this concept that if we don't have internal accountability that's strong, it doesn't matter what external accountability is. Right, and I'm paraphrasing that. I'm not saying it quite right. But the bottom line is what he's saying is that it doesn't really matter what the outside accountability pressures are if we can't agree ourselves internally what we're trying to make happen. And so what's happened instead is that because of external accountability pressures and bad leadership is that we are doing things to teachers rather than with teachers. And so the walkthrough scheme, the formative step evaluations, these VAM kinds of teacher quality assessments and so on, all of this is being done to teachers rather than dialoguing with teachers about what are we trying to make happen here? What do we need to make happen here? How do we work together to make that go? And then how are we going to monitor it along the way? And so you can imagine that if I'm a principal, right, and I have a bunch of teachers and I'm going to go visit that science teacher's classroom, right? It's one thing to say, here's my checklist that I got from the state or from the district, and I'm going to assess you against this checklist of things that you should be doing to do teaching well. And if you don't do them, I'm going to mark you off. That's a very different dialogue than, what are you trying to make happen today in your class? What kind of essential learning are you trying to make go? What would you like me to look for and give you some feedback on, right? And then I'll try to focus on that and give you, and then we can have a conversation afterward with this sense of, feedback and make it better, not gotcha. See how the dialogue is very different, and how we set up those walkthroughs and how we set up those evaluation accountabilities, and those feedback schemes are very different. So is it around learning and feedback and improvement, or is it around accountability and gotcha? And so far we've leaned way too far on the wrong side of that. And so it's no wonder that teachers are skeptical of classroom walkthroughs and evaluations and assessments, because it's all around, not around improvement and feedback, around mutually determined goals where we're holding ourselves internally accountable to try and get better at what we say we want to do. It's all about outside imposition of this, that, and the other, and how we're going to, slap you on the hand or somehow do bad things to you if you don't do them. How's that for 3 minutes?
That is awesome. I see, Morgan, you've turned your video on. Morgan is a principal here in our state capitol, and also definitely is the guy that brings the realism and the honesty at times, and definitely is the guy that likes to push back a little bit, and I love that. So, Morgan, your thoughts about Scott's reply?
Well, for the most part, sometimes I joke as kind of being the disgruntled educator, but it's not because I don't love my job. It's not because I don't love working with kids and with teachers. I get disgruntled because of the system. And to me, a lot of times, because, a lot of what Scott's saying in regards to PD and things of that nature, I even think teachers would agree with it. And based on some of the comments, I think maybe it was Lisa that had been part of some of the PDs, hey, it's great. But all of a sudden, teachers move up to administrators, and it's like they forgot where they came from. And I guess two things. I don't know, one, if it's an opinion that you would like to offer, but I guess one thing, it seems like we always start from the premise that teachers aren't doing a good job. And then it seems like all the PD, all the the walkthroughs, everything starts from, well, they're not doing their job, and so I'm gonna figure out how I can make them better. So to me, that already hurts any type of evaluation system. And then two, and I don't know what this would look like, and maybe it's impossible because of this whole mindset that everything has to be data driven, as opposed to using Diane Ravitch coin phrase, data informed. I think a lot of times when we do these walkthroughs and what we call an evaluation, the best analogy I can give, because I believe there is an art to teaching, and because I believe that those lessons and what goes on in that classroom is an extension of who that teacher is I have 4 children, and I can only imagine what would happen if one of my children spent all day at Sunday school drawing this nice picture for Father's Day, and then my daughter brings it to me and says, "Hey, Daddy, look what I did. Look how much time. Look how great I did." And I told him, "Well, that's nice, but this line's a little bit out of place." Or, "Well, you really," and it's almost like I start picking things apart as opposed to focusing on what's good. And I guess I don't know, because I've not seen it yet, some sort of subjective measure, some sort of dialogue that can take place to focus on what's going right, as opposed to this whole mindset that teachers aren't doing a good job, because I just don't believe that's true.
And I don't think that's true either. And I also think that most educators want to get better at what they do, right? But not in a gotcha sense, in a feedback sense, right? So the question is really, who has the locus of control? Who has the locus of choice? So Morgan, it's one thing if you come in with your district mandated walkthrough instrument or state mandated walkthrough instrument and be like, here's the checklist, good luck, right? It's another thing when you sit down with a teacher and you say, all right, so I know you're focusing on literacy development this year, right? What are some things that you'd like me to look for when I come into your classroom? Like tell me about what you're trying to make happen, and then, I'll let you know, if I have any thoughts on that afterwards, and we'll just dialogue about it. And, let's get a peer in there too, not just me, to give you some other thoughts, because she's also working on literacy development, because that's one of our goals this year for the grade level of the school. And then let's hack out how we might do some things differently, right? That's a very different conversation, and it has nothing to do with accountability and everything to do with us wanting to get better and setting up our own feedback mechanisms. But when teachers have the locus of control around that, right, in terms of here's what I want to achieve, here's what I'm trying to make happen within the context of needed goals for the school and the system, but I have choice and I have locus of control, way different kind of process, right? But that's sort of that example that I was talking about of internal accountability being much stronger than external accountability. Where we say we can take care of those things outside that are hammering down at us, but let us figure out how to make it happen inside, and let's be true to ourselves and care for each other in ways that work, rather than succumbing to stupid practices because outside people make us want to. We can satisfy those outside demands without being stupid internally, right?
I agree. It's just
It's hard.
you mentioned mandated walkthroughs, and the district already has the walkthrough template.
Right.
All right, this is what we're looking for, and I don't know, it's this whole top-down approach as opposed to, it sounds like what you're advocating for, which is proven to work, a bottom-up approach, and let the value be intrinsic as opposed to some sort of external pressure.
Right. It's always more productive to work with people, right, rather than us versus them. Always. And that's true whether it's accountability walkthroughs or professional learning.
I guess I just hope for the day when those district administrators agree with the same thing, because like I said, it doesn't seem to happen.
So get yourself promoted. Be the district administrator that does it right.
Well, that's actually why I became an administrator. I still miss teaching, but instead of complaining about it, I figured I'd take the right steps to do something about it. But agreed.
Absolutely. Here you go.
Awesome. See, Morgan has such a great heart. We always have great discussions, so I knew you'd bring some action to the table, Morgan. So, all right, well, we're about at the hour mark, and the game is probably about to begin, and Scott has been extremely generous with his time. Thanks for joining, Scott, and any last parting thoughts, any words of wisdom for the UKSTL community as they finish up their program and become technology leaders around the world?
We know in our hearts what's right. I would encourage everybody to have the bravery and the courage to stand up for that and to use your voices to advocate for that. Too many of us are complicit in our silence, and too many of us are too acquiescent rather than fighting for something better. And the true essence of leadership, I would say, is be willing to take a stand for something and really try to change things in positive directions, not simply rolling over and being managers of whatever idiocy is coming around from above or outside. So that doesn't really have anything to do with sort of the topic of the day, but it has everything to do with sort of being true to yourself and being really effective, powerful leaders that can inspire others to action. So thanks for the opportunity to chat with you guys today. I'll be watching the game. Have fun.
Righto. Thanks so much, Scott, for joining. Everyone in the room, let's meet up back in the Connect room at about 7:10, okay? And we have a little bit to debrief. We'll try and debrief a little bit of that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about upping your presentation game before we wind up tonight, okay? So 7:10, back in the Adobe Connect room.
How many students are in this class?
About 14 or so. Yeah.